Dear Lord, Father in heaven, we just thank you for this wonderful season that we're upon, and we just thank you for every blessings in our lives, Lord. And this church is a really big one to me, Lord, and I thank you so much for it. I thank you for the Sunday school and for the services today. Bless every family here, and Norm as he brings the word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Having a little difficulty with my throat, and I went out to get a cup of coffee before we started, 10 after 9, and saw someone, and I said, "How you doing?" "I'm stressed." I said, "Well, tell me about it. What's going on?" "I'm feeling anxiety in my job, frustrated with the expectation of my boss, and so we spent about 10 minutes just talking about that. So it's very appropriate to be talking about anxiety, possibly depression. This morning we're going to be talking a little bit about how we get peace and hope. And next Sunday, and then there were two, this Sunday and next Sunday, then I'm done for the year. And I really thank you for being in here. What happens when you're depressed or feeling anxiety is very important, because we will all experience it to some degree. And so as we move into this category of how we deal with the antidote for depression or anxiety, even mild depression, it's important that we look to Scripture and see if we can figure out what we can do to help ourselves and help us understand what God can do for us in our life. So how do we deal with the anxiety and depression that seems to follow us with the pressures of our health, finances, relationships, and world crises, which we always seem to be in? Paul in Philippians has the answer. In Philippians 4:4-9, Paul gives the classic remedy for anxiety and depression. Mike, as I understand it, is going to read Philippians 4:4-9 for us.
Yes, you have the mic on. Try it again.
Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Tychicus will tell you all the news about me. He is a dear brother, a faithful minister, and a fellow servant in the Lord. I am sending him to you for the express purpose that you may know about our circumstances, and that he may encourage your hearts. He is coming with Onesimus, our faithful and dear brother, who is one of you. They will tell you everything that is happening here.
I want to begin addressing the subject of why we're anxious or feel mild depression by discussing the premise behind Paul's remedy. This remedy has to do with expectations. I've had a threatening illness. I was told I had 6 months to live. That's back when doctors' bedside manner was quite different than it is today. Now they at least say something like their odds are 10% or whatever of survival. I've been fired from a job. I've had to lay off 17 school employees in 1 year because of legislative budget cuts, and the list goes on. And I've studied and lived this concept of expectations. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors, says, expectations are everything. I wanted to do something special for my 5-year-old granddaughter, Evelyn. So I decided to take her to a movie. Had a surround sound theater with reclining seats. Raise your feet up just like you sit in my lazy boy at home. And the movie was a cartoon called Boss Baby. It had a great review and was a continual sellout for several weeks in Madison and Janesville and throughout the nation. I told her about what we were going to see, and we were filled with excited expectation. I took her to the nicest theater I could find in Madison, but when we arrived, they were almost sold out. So Evelyn and I had to sit in the front row seats. When we reclined in our chairs, we looked straight up at this giant screen about 25 feet high. And right on either side of us were these two huge giant speakers. And the movie's about a little baby who pretends to be a baby for his parents, but when they're out of sight, He dresses in a suit, takes his briefcase, and goes off to work in the office like an executive. So basically the idea is all in his imagination. He's the boss. He's the boss baby. He does what a boss would do. Bosses people around, hires and fires, and all this is in his imagination. But it's portrayed on the screen as real. And so when he goes home, he acts like this little baby, you know, with a pacifier in his mouth. So that's what's going on. The movie was absolutely hilarious. I laughed during the entire time. But Evelyn wasn't laughing. She saw it as real. It wasn't like Mickey Mouse. The coup de grace was when the baby's parents sent this little baby to his room because he was naughty. So in the baby's imagination, the room transformed into a prison cell with bars on the windows and a big lock on the door. And that did it. The expectation Evelyn had of this movie was obviously not being met. Grandpa, this movie's no good and we need to leave. Despite my explanation, to this day, when I mentioned Boss Baby to her, she tells me it was awful. Her expectation was not met. In fact, I said just a week ago, I said, Evelyn, Boss Baby's coming out in DVD. We get it. She said, Grandpa, if you want to do something special, take Grandma. I don't want to. So to repeat C.S. Lewis, expectations are everything. It's my sincere belief, unmet expectations are the primary cause of disappointment, frustration, anger, resentment, and a host of other negative emotions. This is validated by the way we think and act when expecting something. For example, Christians are often mildly depressed or filled with occasional anxiety because they do not expect attacks on their peace and joy, which are inevitable. They feel this way because they're Christians. According to what I've read, we're often mildly depressed because we're depressed over our depression. If you think about that. In other words, we're sad that we're sad. We're down. Because we're down. We're surprised that we're surprised. We're upset because we're upset. And if we weren't so upset about being upset, we wouldn't be so upset. Now, that makes sense to you, right? You know, when you get down and you go, I'm really down because I'm down. And so the spiral goes down. As Christians, at least half of the anger and being upset is the anger and being upset because this is not supposed to happen to Christians in our mind. We think it's not supposed to be like this. That's because Christians do not come into the Christian life with the proper expectations. One issue is that Christians have more enemies than non-Christians. When we were a non-Christian, we had one real enemy, and that was God. People forget who we're saved from. We're saved from God's wrath. Christians don't often think that through. It's not because God is mean. It's because you were at war with him. You declared war, so there was a state of warfare. But God is a mighty, wonderful adversary. He tries to save all the people who are at war with him. The minute you make peace with God, all the enemies declare war on you. And they are not nice enemies. Before you became a Christian, your enemy was someone who loved you, who cared about you, someone who's doing everything he could to wake you up. Now, when you accept Christ, all your enemies are hateful, hurtful, and mean. And the three enemies that I want to dwell on today are the world, the flesh, and the devil. And if you do not have a proper expectation, you're going to get mauled. Just like if you were in the military service, and you do not have the proper expectation and training, you'll get hurt or killed. If you overestimate or underestimate the enemy in a war, you'll be in trouble. If you overestimate the enemy, you'll surrender or retreat too soon. If you underestimate the enemy, you'll go into the battle with insufficient resources. If you come into Christianity without someone telling you, that you'll have a much nastier and meaner enemies than you had before you were a Christian. You have the wrong expectation, and you'll be mauled spiritually. So let me ask you this question. Why don't we have proper expectations when we become a Christian? And that expectation is, it's going to be tougher, not easier, sometimes as we face these enemies in spiritual warfare. Why is that? What would you say? Let's just talk about it for a minute. Because I think it's a very common issue. Dave? Well, go ahead.
It's not the season, but it sounds like golfing to me.
Sounds like golfing. We expect to do better always than we do. One of the most frustrating sports on the planet. Just seems like you should be able to hit that little ball straight.
When we used to commit sin before being Christian, and bothered us.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you turn that up a little bit, please? Thank you.
The sins we committed before we were Christian, they bothered us some, but now they hurt so much more when we do commit a sin.
Okay, so that's one. Expectation. We're more sensitive to the Spirit.
I searched for a long time to find out the truth because I had grown up Christian, knew everything that I was supposed to know by I'm sure, a senior in high school. And then I went to college and heard all these other things and was told by 3 people that I was really stupid. What was I doing in college? Because I believed in Jesus Christ. And I had heard that then, after that, I heard things that I looked up in the Bible and were true, that weren't things I had heard before. Everything I heard before, including Jesus dying on the cross for my sins, were all good things. They weren't always good for the disciples, but for me and for my faith, they were good things. And now I'm hearing all these other things, and I look them up and not in context believe some of them, or started to think about them, and it was like a 6-year trial. And I started going to Bible study fellowship in Madison. And if anybody here knows Mary Ann Thies, she's the one that took me there. And it wasn't even a semester, and I was so turned back to Jesus and saw all the things that were illegitimate that were being said about everything about Christianity, and saw how it had come about to be that way, but I never did understand, and I still to this day have a problem understanding why it is so important to people who don't believe in Christ, why it's so important for them to want everyone else not to too. It just baffles me when someone hears the truth about eternal life and says, that's not for me.
So we have accepted Christ, and all of a sudden we feel life should be better, not worse. And in some ways it is, and we'll talk about that. But it's not less contentious, because the enemies are very real. So let's move on and talk about it a little bit. If you're a Christian, you have enemies. The flesh, the world, and the devil. However, they cannot destroy your salvation or pull you out of God's hand. Jesus said, my own know me, and no one can pluck them out of my hand. So the only thing these enemies can do is make you ineffective, and even totally ineffective by taking away your peace and joy. And that's what they're out to do, and that needs to be our expectation as a Christian. So what's joy? Joy is a spiritual buoyancy that comes when we're rejoicing in God. In 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, Paul states, we're down but not out. He says, therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on what is seen, not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Paul is saying we're not impervious to suffering, but we're unsinkable. We can withstand the outer attacks and still have inner peace and joy despite our circumstances. We're constantly being pushed under the water, but we do not stay down. We do not sink because we have buoyancy, and we keep coming right back up. The buoyancy comes from focusing on the unchanging privileges we have from God. We've talked about this before, but I ask you to refresh your memories about some of the things we've talked about. The opposite of joy is not sadness. The opposite of joy is not sadness. The Bible is constantly talking about how you can be joyful even when you're sad. This is critical to our understanding of Christianity and stems from our understanding of the difference between happiness and joy. For those of you who have been attending this class, we've dug into the differences between joy and happiness. Happiness comes from the comfort of having things that you want. Joy is a deep kind of rejoicing, assurance, and security that we know we have when we have the only thing that really matters. As a Christian, when we have a setback or disappointment, we're not shaken, even if it makes us sad, because we can fall back on the foundation that gives us perspective and assurance that we can absorb the hurt or sadness. We can even experience joy in it. That's because joy is not based on our circumstances. So the opposite of joy is not sadness. The opposite of joy is hopelessness. Hopelessness is having nothing to rest in. In 1 Thessalonians 4:13 it states, we do not want to be ignorant of those who have died or grieve like those who have no hope. The counterfeit of joy is happiness, which rests in the feeling of comfort or pleasures, and it is resting in the blessings, not the blesser. This is such an important and critical piece, and I want you to grab it. Happiness is not the blessings. Or, excuse me, happiness is the blessings, not the blesser. Joy is the blesser. Jesus is the blesser. So, happiness can occur in a Christian's life because you have the things you want. But that's not joy. Joy is when you know Christ and you have the assurance of your salvation, even when sometimes you don't have the things that you want. In fact, it could be the opposite. You know, we get so excited about things. This is very carnal, but when I was with Becky, wanted a car, a certain kind of car. And we looked, and she took me to a dealership that had a different kind of car. It was actually better than the one I wanted. I was so happy. I mean, I was thrilled. I watched it every day for like 3 weeks. It was amazing. You know how they smell good and they look good. And after 6 months to a year, it looked different. And I'm not disappointed with it, but it lost its energy for me. I don't watch it every day. And so I get to thinking about that, and it seems like whenever we're accomplishing something, or whenever we buy something, or whenever we do something, it fades. Anyone understand? It fades. And it's so exciting at the time. You just can't think you could be any happier. I've received awards in my life. They're in boxes up in my attic. And it's faded. And I'm grateful for what I received, but nobody comes up and says, oh, congratulations on the award you received 20 years ago. It just doesn't happen. And so it fades in our memory. And then there are other things that even take a dive deeper than that, where we want that to last, and it doesn't. And then what happens to our happiness? It goes away. But if we base our level of what we can really enjoy out of life on things or circumstances, we're going to constantly be disappointed. Because we're going to have attacks on those things, including our health, including our relationships, including our finances, including the things that we love to do. Some of those things disappear or are thwarted. And as we get older, that's even more dominant. So what do we need to focus on to maintain our joy? The blesser, not the blessings. David, in Psalm 4, is saying, and I paraphrased and modernized it, is that those who rely on circumstantial joy only have joy when the stock market is up. But Dave has joy all the time. Their joy is in the stock market. And David's joy is in the one who owns all the wealth in the world and will provide what we need. I know a lot of people who watch the stock market. Last week was a very good week. But I've seen people get really down when those weeks are bad. 2007, I know some of my friends lost 50% of their retirement. That's tragic. And they had no happiness in that. And it was hard for them. Very, very difficult for them. So to rejoice in the blesser means we can enjoy pleasure. You can enjoy good food, comfort, and physical pleasures. But you know what they are there for. As we've discussed, these pleasures are just samples or dim hints of what is to come as we look to an eternal heaven and a new earth with Jesus. Here's a great quote. C.S. Lewis stated, "A real Christian allows his or her mind to run up the sunbeam to the sun. He does not sit and look at the sunbeam. The pleasures of the world, he knows where it comes from. In other words, let your mind run up the blessing to the blesser. That is the way you can really enjoy the world. You can enjoy a delicious meal, praise the one who provides it, and you know that someday you will sit down at the wedding supper of the Lamb, and that will be a meal of all meals, and it is never over." When you think about that metaphor, a real Christian allows your mind to run up the sunbeam to the sun. What we enjoy on a daily basis is the sunbeam. When you follow that, whatever it is, whether it's good food, your home, your relationships, you follow it to where the source of joy is. And things start to take perspective. C.S. Lewis goes on. He's kind of a heavy writer. He says, "We are to shine like the sun. We are to be given the morning star. If we take the Scriptures seriously and believe He will one day give us the morning star, as it states in Revelation, and cause us to put on the splendor of the sun, then we may surmise the ancient myths and the modern poetry so false as history is real prophecy. At present, we're on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and purity of the morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see, but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, we're a Christian, we shall get in. When human souls will become as perfect and compliant as the inanimate creation in its lifeless obedience. In other words, the clams and the frogs, the geese, the sun, the moon, are all doing exactly what God created them to do. A frog is perfectly a frog. The problem is that men and women, you and me, are not doing as God created us to do. So frogs have it all over us. They know what to do. We do not. We become disobedient. Lewis goes on to say, when human souls become as perfect and compliant as the inanimate creation, like the frogs, is in its lifeless obedience, human souls will put on his glory. The greater glory of which nature is only a first sketch. The faint, far-off creative energy which God created in matter and nature when God made the world are what we now call physical pleasures. And even thus filtered, these physical pleasures are too much for our present management. What would it be to taste at the fountainhead, that stream of which even these lower reaches prove so intoxicating? What C.S. Lewis is saying is we cannot handle with moderation most of the physical pleasures that we encounter because we abuse them. Just think of all the things we abuse that should be really wonderful in our life. Lewis states these blessings are just a far-off, dim echo which comes from the blesser as the blessings. So Lewis says, what will it be to drink and taste from the fountainhead, which even these lower reaches prove so intoxicating? Yet that's exactly what lies before us in heaven if we're a Christian. And Augustine stated, the rapture of the saved soul will flow over into a glorified body. Now we've been talking about this for weeks. So what Lewis and Augustine are saying is that a Christian should know more about joy than anyone else. A Christian should be able to enjoy a good meal or any pleasure because we recognize who created it. And that it is only a dim comparison of what it will be like when we get to heaven. So this goes back to our study of heaven in the beginning of the classes that we had. Christians should be experts in joy and peace. And we're not. We're scared. We're scared of the dangers of the pleasures of the world. The primary reason is because we focus on the blessing instead of the blesser. So how can a Christian have joy? Well, the Bible helps us understand that joy comes from focusing on the blesser and not the blessings. That's what produces joy in all that we say and do. So what about peace? If joy comes from the blesser and not the blessing, what about peace? Because everyone's looking for peace. What does the Bible say about peace? Again, we go back to Philippians 4, which Mike read, and it states that peace comes from what Victor said last week. Peace comes from the confidence that God will work everything out for good. Maybe not our immediate or even our future comfort, but for good as God determines in the big picture long-term view. And the opposite of peace is anxiety. It is helpful here to look at the difference between peace and joy. You know, anxiety and worry can actually be a sin because we are not to give ourselves up to anxiety and worry. Now, I would have a question that you may not want to tackle, but you can think about it or you can respond. Is God in control of everything? It's the title of my book, Is God Controlling Everything? So, does He control all your moving parts? your decisions? Or some? Or none? What percentage do you control? I mean, that's an interesting thing to ponder when you think about the fact that we are in a situation where we often say God's in control. Yet, aren't you responsible for your actions? As we've discussed before, joy is the opposite of hopelessness. Joy is being up despite our circumstances, because we know where joy comes from and whom joy comes. From whom joy comes. The opposite of peace is not hopelessness or despair. The opposite of peace is worry or anxiety. If you could reduce or eliminate your worry and anxiety, you would have peace. And now, in the next few slides, the most important slides of this lesson, Philippians 4 says, we should not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God will result. Now, I have read that, I'm going to say 1,000 times, and I never thought about this until this week. So don't miss this part of the verse. Everything, by prayer and thanksgiving, present your requests to God. All prayer must be presented with thanksgiving. All prayer must be presented with thanksgiving. Now that is a tough assignment. Wow. We are to make all of our requests from a heart that is thankful. We are to present all our requests with thanksgiving. How can we make requests with thanksgiving when we're just making the request for it at this time, and it is often something we're troubled about? What are your thoughts? Have you thought about this before? When you're presenting your most anxious thoughts to God, your deepest pain, you are to be doing it with thanksgiving.
We have to praise and thank Him just for being our God and being there for us. To thank Him for all things. He's the one who brings us the peace and the joy.
You have a hand down here, Chris, too. Dave, over here. Maggie, go ahead.
I remember something that Murr always taught, and it was the acronym ACTS, A-C-T-S. Adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and then supplication.
Doc, put that up to your lips now. Oh, you don't have a mic? Oh, Lee first and then over here. I'm sorry.
I was just going to go back to chapter 4, but go on to verse 11. And I think one of the secrets is, in whatever state I am, there to be content. And it's not easy sometimes, I think back. It's not contented when you lose loved ones, a husband, a daughter, a grandson, that type of stuff. That's a little different. But one of the situations I've had to deal with is 10 years ago when I was flooded out of my house. And I had to move into town. That's probably been one of the hardest and longest things for me to deal with. Because I envisioned coming into town, okay, I didn't want to move to town in the first place, but I had to, I had no choice. I would have neighbors that would be very, visit and it'd be neighborly. That's not the way it is. This has been my biggest struggle. But also, it's up to me to change that. And if I'm ever discontented, and I'm so thankful God has never put me in a place like other people have been. There's people that are so depressed they can't deal with it from day to day. And God has been gracious that way, and I'm thankful for that. I begin all my prayers thanking God for who He is, that He's my God, and He's real to me, and I thank Him for my salvation every day. And but I change things. There's days I'm mixed up, but then I go do something different, and it changes it.
It's wonderful to have neighbors that you can get to know. Our neighbors, the elementary school girl that brought us over cookies not long ago, very sweet. Our neighbor across the road is a little weird. He wears a Santa Claus hat. He's going out to get the mail, but otherwise it's a pretty nice neighborhood.
You chased my mind the last 2 weeks, the boys I spent the last week reading Romans 12 in the King James Version. And it is so clear about what you're saying, to the fact that when things are happening, this is where you need to go. And it says, "Blessed you therefore, brethren, by the mysteries of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." But when you go on into the next chapter, it says, "And be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what the good and the acceptable and perfect will of God." And it went on from there, and I've got my little hand Bible in my hand, and I've all got it in yellow, because it's really the answer that if we don't forgive, He says He won't forgive us. He says if we don't feed our enemies, He's not going to feed us. And it's up to us to do the changes and be what it is that He wants us to be.
I appreciate your thoughts, Bill. The amazing thing about you, you're an inspiration, because people your age, even people my age, don't change their mind much. And you are a lifelong learner. I really appreciate that. Yes.
So giving over our prayers, requests, anxiety, always thankfulness comes easy. You know that God always loves you. You're the one who's worried and anxious. God is not.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Go ahead, Dean.
Beyond just the being thankful that God is our Father too, I think that no matter what we're going through, and I feel like I've gone through a long list of things, struggles over the years, and even though going through any of those struggles, there's always something that I can be thankful for, beyond even just the fact that God is there for me. There are many blessings, and we have to remember that. And sometimes we got to kind of hard past those struggles, but I think there's always things that it's given us that we can be thankful for.
I think to be thankful in the midst of praying over something means that we actually can take control of our thoughts. With God's help, obviously. But I think while we're praying, we've got to be thinking. And if we are to give thanks, then you can't thank Him in some phony way, but I guess if you start thinking about God being with you through it and knowing that there's good that comes out of difficulty, you can be grateful. But you do have to take control of your thinking. I've had to do that many, many times. You know, as I said, you live with in seasons, periods of low-grade depression. What are you going to do about it? you really have to think through it, and as you think, you're also relating those thoughts to God. It's a mixture of thinking and praying.
Yeah, and what we focus on.
Yeah.
If we're focusing on Christ, that's a whole different focus than if we're always focusing on our problem, or our concern, or what we're worried about. Dave, there's a hand back there.
Sometimes I think some of the hardest things in life that you try to work through have been, at least for me, have been relationships, people that you struggle with either at work or in your family, and you know, it's easy to kind of put up a wall and stick to your I'm right on this, and it really all it does is break down the relationship. And then you have nothing. And you know, I've found that, and it takes, like Larry said, it takes a conscious effort first. I have to make myself think that I should pray for that person, because I don't want to, because they're wrong and they're hurting me. And so, but I have found that once you make yourself pray and talk to God about that person, and then continue and make it happen, you can't hate somebody you're praying for. I think I believe it's impossible to carry on I have enmity with somebody that you're praying for. And so sometimes I've had to make myself think that I'm going to pray for someone and almost force yourself. But then once you start doing it, it changes the relationship. It might not change them at all, but it changed me.
Sure. Great thought. So when I was superintendent of schools, we had about 230 employees, and not all of them were perfect. And there were some that were quite cantankerous, and some that we had to remove from the profession. And I remember telling the administrative team, because the middle management were usually the ones that had to deal with that, not me, I would say, no, here's what I want you to do. I want you to love them. And they'd roll their eyes, and why are you kidding me? What are you talking about? No, I'm serious. I want you to do what you think is in their best interest. And if that means we have to remove them, fine. But don't do it out of malicious intent. Don't be mean about it. Don't look at it as they're your enemy. Work with them. And I think that's the epitome of loving your neighbor. You know, and sometimes it's hard to even like them, but you have to love them. And that's a command. It's not an option. And I think we can do that if our heart is right. You can even be thankful for them. Because you can pray for them, and that's what it says. You need to be thankful. Yes.
You're on. You know what? When I would be thankful before I really believed in God. I'm thankful for all the things. They were just momentary. They come and they went. But when God took me in, that's where joyfulness came in, because it went on and on and on.
Sure. Great thought. So hand over here, Chris.
I think...
No, you have to use the mic because it's being recorded. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's being recorded, and if you get frustrated if they can't hear on the tape.
Just to qualify the word anxiety, it strikes me that God allows us to be anxious for a purpose. And the purpose is to draw us to prayer. So we could look at anxiety as a precursor to prayer.
A vehicle.
Rather than try to pretend that there's no problem or escape the problem by resting in the grace of God and forgetting that we have responsibility. Anxiety makes us feel responsible, as if we can do something about it, but we know we can't, so we get into the spiral. But if we see it as God's call to prayer, then anxiety can be a good thing.
Very insightful. Why haven't you been coming more often? That's a great insight.
He lives in Chicago.
You should be sharing. Oh, that's why.
Did you hear what he said?
That is the answer. The answer is, that is the secret. That is the key. We're thankful before we make the request, because we are saying, Lord, whatever you do, I will trust that it is good. So I thank you for it. Galen and I were just talking last Sunday about praying for healing, and then healing doesn't occur. Or we're asking for financial relief, and that does not occur. And the list goes on. What are some of the reasons our prayers are not answered by granting the requests we make? What are some of the reasons our prayers are not answered by granting the requests we're making? Isn't it lame to use God's will as an excuse for something's not happening that we want to happen? This seems kind of lame. People say, oh yeah, you can pray for anything. Because if it doesn't happen, you say, well, that's God's will. So, if things don't happen, you got to make it. You got both, Chris. You have both sides covered.
Well, sometimes the timing is not right. They will happen, but maybe 28 years from now, we just don't know. It will happen at God's time.
Yeah. And sometimes he says no. But it has been an argument that's been used against me often. That, but on the other hand, answered prayer can be such a blessing when it's answered in a way that we feel like it helps improve our peace and joy. Regardless of the answer, we're to be thankful for the answering as we are making the request. We are to know in our heart and mind that the result will be good. We may not be happy about it. We may not like the answer or the delay in the answer, but we can still be thankful. With the tragedies of life all around us and often happening to those we love, how can we do this and accept that as true? We think of car accidents, heart attacks, suicides, child abuse. But the secret is to be thankful. But that can be challenging. So if we've read Philippians 4, in all prayer, we're to be thankful. Peace is the confidence and trust in God. However, there's a difference between peace with God and the peace of God. Peace with God is to surrender to God and accept Jesus as Savior. The peace of God is to have the assurance that you are saved and that your circumstances do not erode that assurance. The peace with God and the peace of God are distinct, but they're never separated. The peace of God is a frame of heart that is completely constant and solid and confident no matter what the condition or circumstance. And that is really what people want. People all over the world are searching for that kind of peace. A person who is confident and calm no matter what the circumstances. The worldly version of that is someone who is steady in a crisis, like the person on the SWAT team who talks to the person inside holding hostages and never gets rattled. People are getting killed or hurt. That doesn't bother him or her because they're cool under fire. The reason that's a worldly version of peace is because the biblical peace is not talking about in our life as an isolated area. Peace in Galatians 5 is a part of the fruit of the Spirit. It is the fruit of the Spirit, not the fruits of the Spirit. They're all to be present in the Christian and working harmoniously with one another. Love, joy, peace, patience, and so forth are all aspects of the whole. There is a way without the Spirit of God to artificially manufacture one or two of these fruit, so it looks like you have peace, but it's only at the expense of joy and love. You can develop a counterfeit peace, which is actually cynicism. There's a way of hardening your heart so you don't care, and it can look like you have peace. The best way to never get hurt in a relationship or hurt by a friend or family member is not to get close to them. A person like that is singular in person and not tender-hearted and humble or willing to make sacrifices for others out of the love for them. There are those who can have what looks like joy and humility, but there's no peace in their life. They're sensitive people, but they're up and down and all over with their emotions. They're approachable, but they do not have peace and stability. I'll wrap it up. Then there are those people that look like they have control with little or no emotions showing. And it looks like they're always steady or in control. They're very faithful and dependable. But when it comes to joy, sensitivity, kindness, and love and generosity, They don't have it. Because only the Spirit of God can create fruits all at once. So the way you can tell if any of these fruits are authentic is there's symmetry about them. Only the Spirit of God can create them all together. Only the Spirit of God can create all of those, and also self-controlled, absolutely dependable, like the rock, which is peaceful. I'm going to have to close there, but I can tell you that I'm going to wrap this up next week. And unfortunately, I haven't had an opportunity for a lot of discussion this morning that may be similar, because I have OCD and I must finish my slides next week. So I hope you come and